Travis, how you doing today?
Doing great.
I'm looking forward to having you on the show. You've got quite the resume of a handful of successful exits at a young age, and you've got multiple different journeys to kind of walk us through. But for the audience, maybe take us back to the day that you decided to become an entrepreneur for the first time, and how you decided to jump full force into it.
Yeah. Okay. So the very first time I decided to become an entrepreneur, seriously, everybody has their little childhood stories of the lemonade stand or things along those lines as a kid. But the actual real story for me was I was in college. I was at the time simultaneously just had turned pro in my mixed martial arts career, and I was in grad school. I was also playing professional online poker. So I was making a little bit of money, doing some fun things. But I didn't feel a whole lot of a sense of stability or long-term sustainability in the things that I was doing. And I'd always thought about potentially starting a business, and decided I wanted to start one with a few of my friends, building bed lofts in the dorms.
Oh
and
gosh. Did you guys have like those wooden ones that would go in like frames and stuff like that?
Yeah, we were going to actually. We had this whole plan. A few friends of mine had built their own bed lofts that actually were big frames that ran across the ceiling and then hung from the ceiling from chains.
Mm-hmm.
And they freed up a lot of room in the actual dorm living area, in contrast to the ones with stilts. And we decided we were going to start that company, and we got pretty far down the rabbit hole, bought a bunch of materials, and then we realized that the university would not sell us their mailing list of people who were moving into the dorms because they had an exclusive contract with bedlofts.com. So that idea went out the window. But while those guys were content giving up on the entrepreneurial dream, I decided, well, if it's not this, it's got to be something else. That day I saw the time, it was a short-lived show, but I think 2 seasons it ran. It was called the Tap Out Show. And I was fighting at the time, and Tap Out at the time, this was in, I think, 2008 or 2009. They were like the Nike of mixed martial arts. So every fighter knew who they were and looked up to them, and they were huge. And that, I believe at their height, they did about 500 million annually.
Oh, wow.
And I saw the guys, and they were tattooed, and they had no traditional like NBA background. And that I saw them, and I said, wow, that it looks a lot like me, but I feel like I'm a lot smarter than they are. And so I decided I was going to start a business that was effectively a Tap Out clone. And it was a mixed martial arts apparel and equipment company. And I started that company in 2009. I started it with my student loans funding the company.
Oh, nice.
And a few Visa cards, and basically was desensitized completely to risk through online poker. I was a coach on some of the top online poker training sites. My first book was published when I was 21 years old on online poker. It was also my graduate thesis. So I had been completely desensitized to all things risk, and that I pretty much still am today, which has served me very well and also not so well at times.
I like how you referenced it as like the search for stability too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Oddly enough,
we got entrepreneurs have different definitions of that,
search
right?
is still happening. But yeah, so that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. I did not know what I was doing. I had no business background. My graduate degree that I was about to get was in exercise physiology and biomechanics, so it was not at all anything to do with business. So I basically had to learn by messing up, by reading blog posts, by reading books. That company was not incredibly profitable, but we did end up selling it for about break even at the end of the day. So, and I went through a couple different business partners with that. I was in college, so a few of them just were not in it for the right reasons. They wanted to look cool out at the bar and say that they had a company or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually serious about doing the work behind the scenes that nobody really cared about. So I would buy them out. One I bought out for $500, the other one I bought out for $5,000 at one point. And so like they both were completely content at the time with selling their stake in it, because it wasn't really that big of a company. We drove around to all the small fight shows in the Midwest, sold T-shirts out of our trunk, set up booths with like folding tables, and we basically would do that every single weekend. And had an office on campus that the university gave me. They gave me a computer. They gave me some access to some folks on campus that knew what they were doing, so that was helpful. And things just started from there.
So, going from, your first venture like that into, you've had a total of 7 successful exits. Maybe walk us through, because I other than hitting all of them in detail, I think, pulling the trends, because a lot of listeners and a lot of entrepreneurs don't go through that many exits, especially at your age. And so, what was the various different types of businesses that you've run, and, how did you get into each of them? And then we can kind of maybe take all of them in the whole journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great question. My first one was actually a company that involved physical product. That's the last company that I've run that has involved physical product. I decided I didn't want anything to do with on purpose. Yeah, I didn't want anything to do with inventory or shipping or anything like that. Not that it's not a good business. I just didn't really enjoy that part of the company as much as building things and seeing people do things and looking at analytics and dissecting user psychology and conceptualizing service offerings that could be created from my brain and translated into value. So that was the evolution into the next stage, which was, at the time I knew fitness, I knew training. I was training some guys for the NFL draft. I trained a former UFC champion. I myself was a professional athlete. I was a Division I college athlete. I love fitness so much still to this day. So a few of the companies that I started earlier on were in the fitness space. It allowed me to blend something that I knew very well with something that I didn't know at all. But over the course of time, I got pretty burnt out in fitness. And around that same time, I sold one of 2 fitness companies I had been running and got non-competed in both of them. So kind of had no choice but to go out and figure something else out in business.
So what type of business, what type, were they online marketing courses, training? What kind of businesses were they?
No, I actually haven't gotten into the courses business until recently, and I still can't really say that I'm in it. But the first other company I ran after the clothing company was kind of like an online fitness instruction company. And we basically just sold fitness programs on the internet. We were discoverable on Google. SEO was our primary mode of marketing, but we were product guys in the early days. My partner, Simon Turner, and I, who just found me because I was posting on internet business forums, just asking people for help. And I just was asking questions and wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I had a couple of sites that I had put on my credit card and that I had gotten built because I didn't know anything about coding or building anything or business in general. So I was just asking as many questions as I could, taking it step by step. And we ended up joining forces, and we ran companies together for about 5 or 6 years after that. And we ended up running 2 different companies, probably 3 different companies together. One of them was short-lived that we resigned from, but 2 of them we sold. One of them was that fitness company. It was called Workout Box, and we ended up building that. At its height, it was one of the top fitness sites on Google. We ranked in the top 3 for keywords like exercises and workouts. And so we did pretty well just on that. And because of that, because of Simon's incredible SEO ability at the time, we didn't have to learn anything about marketing. We didn't have to learn. I mean, people just came to us, and they just found us because they were searching and we were there.
That's amazing.
We just had to, try to figure out how to convert them more effectively. So we just did crash courses in conversion optimization. This was in the very early days of Google Website Optimizer and pre-Optimizely and pre any of those other tools. And so we just tried a lot of different things, and that industry was so new that we made our living doing that for a while. We had a small team and inevitably sold the company because we got obsessed with other ideas. But I was always running other projects on the side, kind of in tandem with those, building them up a little bit and then flipping them, kind of like someone would flip houses. And it wasn't because they were ready to sell. It was just, that was the way that I was learning. So the little label that I've gotten online of having 7 acquisitions sounds great, but it's a little bit overinflated. I'll be honest. It's because I would proactively sell a few of them after they got to 6 figures in revenue annually. I would be like, all right, you know what? I've learned all I can from this one. I don't know that I want to be in this business long term, but I know that someone does, and I'm gonna sell it. So there was also another scenario where we just didn't have the necessary licensure to run. Like, one of the applications was at the time, and I didn't know it, but it was kind of a blend between Venmo and Bitcoin. There was nothing that existed in the financial institution at that time that would have allowed us to operate legally in the United States. And our lawyers basically said, you're not a money remitter, you're not a payment processor, and you're doing some things, basically creating your own currency to avoid transaction fees for your customers. You're going to have to go raise some money if you want to have this sort of licensure. And I didn't know anything about raising money, and no one in their right mind should have given me any money at that time. But the app worked really well. Like, it actually worked really well. And I think I only spent like $8,000 on it total, like maybe less, probably like $5,000. I had like an Indian firm, and I was designing the entire user experience, which is the first one I had ever done. But I had seen Simon do it really well over like Skype. We basically were Skyping every day. And I just saw what he was doing and just wondered if I could do the same thing, and ended up selling that asset. I don't want to call it a company because we didn't have any revenue at that point, but it was a really cool asset. We ended up selling it to a Canadian financial institution that still owns it today.
I bet you that's getting a little bit of heat, or it'd be interesting to see with all the cryptocurrency stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, had they launched at the time, I know Venmo had just launched right when we launched, or right when we were going to launch. So that was kind of like the money transfer startup of the moment. And I'm not sure what direction we would have taken with it, because I didn't even think of the concept of creating a different currency at the time. Like, I hadn't even thought that Bitcoin was like a possibility. That was not my idea. I just wanted to send people money for free.
Yeah, right. Instead of all the pain of all the other crap that we go through.
yeah. But over the course of time, kind of your eyes open to possibilities with every single company that I got involved with, or started and sold, or started and didn't sell, because there were several that didn't really do much of anything as well. They, basically will show you a little bit more about what you're capable of doing, what's possible and what's not.
Well, and I think that's a good segue into understanding, so with the mentality of, you're flipping and getting into the businesses for various reasons. We've had some people on the show. I don't know if you're familiar with the Rhodium community, Chris Yates, or the Quiet Light Brokerage, or FE International. Some of the people that are kind of in the same.
Yeah, we actually sold the company with FE International at one point.
Okay, Thomas Smale has been on the show, and and I think the online community has got the more of that mentality than the more of the Main Street. And, as you're getting into these businesses, what's your mindset? Are you starting with the end in mind? Is it a passion? What was it that you were trying to accomplish as you're getting into these companies?
With most of them early, my goal was always, everything was a stepping stone. Everything I wanted to create to unlock newer, bigger opportunities. I wanted to create another larger calling card to give other folks confidence enough in me to give myself more confidence in myself to go do bigger and better things entrepreneurially. And over the course of time, I didn't even realize it, but I was developing a little bit more validation that I knew what I was doing, and folks would start to come to me for things. There was a while there where I was on like everyone's podcast, and I was now teaching a lot of people, and then realized very quickly that my own growth stalled, because I was focused so much on providing knowledge that I wasn't focused as much on acquiring knowledge. And I was so focused on being the teacher that I hadn't spent very much time being the student. So I basically dropped off the face of the earth, like social media wise, about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, and haven't come up for air since. And basically have just been heads down, learning as much as I can from everyone I can. This is one of the first shows that I've actually been on. I've
nice,
probably
I'm honored.
canceled
I love it.
a handful. And it was just the perfect time to do it, because I just had a little bit of a window, but and it was on something that I'd not spoken on before. So that's cool. But yeah, man, like it mindset wise, it's never really been, I want to do this thing for the rest of my life for me.
Do you think that's helped you along the way as you're looking at when and how you should, pull the trigger to sell the companies?
I think it's helped me up to now, but I don't necessarily think it will help me anymore. I think that the entrepreneurs I respect most now are the ones who not only are great at starting things, but are great at finishing. And that's the reputation that I don't know that I quite have yet, to be fair. I think I'm very good at starting things and kicking them off and starting to grow revenue. But in most cases, I've sold before things have become what I imagined they could. I've not stayed until they've reached where I've felt I could take them.
Why don't you elaborate into one of the? Are you thinking of one particular company that you could have done different things with had you stuck with it?
In hindsight, all of them. But there was there was a company called Cyber Superpowers that I had started right after I sold Workout Box, and it was basically like a rent and engineer company. We were selling like fractional engineering resources to companies who didn't necessarily need a full-time engineering team. We would do work on retainer for, I think we started at like $1,500 a month or something like that. You would get an engineer part-time, and we would manage the project for you. And it was like absurdly cheap, and by rights it was only supposed to be that cheap for market validation, but the demand for it exploded. I didn't even do any marketing at all, but we were at about like 150,000 in revenue in 11 months, just organically. Like people were just calling me, and it's not a ton if you're actually proactively going out and selling, but it was enough for market validation for sure. And had I shored up processes a little bit more and systemized a little bit better and began to actually proactively make sales and create a sales pipeline and that sort of thing, that company probably would have gone to, upper six figures in year 2, mid 7 figures in year 3, low 8 figures in year 4, etc.
Yeah, that's some serious potential.
Definitely. And it's predictable revenue, and there's demand for what you're offering. And I just hated every single day of it. It was not what I set out to do. I wanted to build cool things with great folks, and I ended up managing people who did not understand what took engineers so long to do their job, which is everyone who ever hires an engineer, by the way.
I used to manage a bunch. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyone who's never been an engineer, or who's never built things to the web or built apps or anything like that, it's not something that, even if you can ideate on it overnight, it's not easy to do. It does take time. It takes careful planning. And some people make it look easy. Some people make it look simple, but it's engineering. Mm-hmm. So it takes time and effort and know-how and collaboration. And so you basically have to try to figure out a way to keep people happy. And that was my job, to keep upset people happy. And it was just not something I enjoyed to do.
Our old business was outsourced IT. No one ever calls you because they're like having a really good day.
Yeah, exactly. So we ended up selling that company to a graphic arts firm in Manhattan. Unfortunately, we kind of botched that sale, because the sale came from like a referral from a community that I really trusted. And the gentleman who bought it didn't know anything about buying or running a development company. And he actually, during the process, asked, "Hey, do you know any courses about, like, online courses about running a software development company?"
Oh my gosh.
But I was just ready to be done with it. I told my dad I just wanted to shut it down. He's like, "No, you can sell it. Come on, there's value there." So I did. But unlike some of the prior companies, we did not go through escrow, and we did not go through a broker. Mm-hmm. We just did seller financing, and we did installments because they wanted to just augment their...
You did seller financing for a guy that didn't know anything about engineering?
We did seller financing because they were a really successful graphic arts firm. and they
Oh,
just
got it.
wanted to
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
augment their existing business. And I was like, okay, you know what? Like,
Mm-hmm.
became really highly recommended. I know who you're doing business with, so it's a no brainer that
Mm-hmm.
if you take these folks that I've been managing really effectively for a year, granted they were a little bit overworked, but my team was pretty solid for me.
Mm-hmm.
The staff immediately jumped into bed with a team with a completely different managerial style,
Yep.
and it did not mesh well with the way that they preferred to work. And so they basically stopped working as hard. And that the company that bought our company basically said, we're not going to pay you. We're going to, like, they had given us a little bit of a down payment, but they said, we're not
Yep.
going to pay you anything else. And that was, at the time, that was my income, that I had just sold them my income with the expectation of income back for them. So I was going to start another project, which I had sunk a bunch of money into already. So suddenly I was in a bad spot, and I was like the primary breadwinner in my household at the
Mm-hmm.
time with my girlfriend, and we were living in Los Angeles next to the beach, and I'm thinking to myself,
But now
okay,
what?
yeah. So that was a taste of, one of many dips on the entrepreneurial roller coaster.
So, I mean, you touched on a lot of really key and interesting things, Travis, because I think there's this, other than just quickly selling your company and you're done and you walk away, there's so many intricacies on, like you said, no escrow, broker, seller financing, all these things to think about. When you look at the various exits that you've gone through, other than you've touched on like quite a few good ones right there. What are some of the things that you would do differently to make sure that you're protecting yourself throughout the exit?
The main thing is I'm going to do as much work through. I mean, first and foremost, I want more partners that are involved in my companies. That I was a sole founder in that project. It was all bootstrapped, and it was all my capital from a prior exit. So I had taken a big gamble with it, and it was paying off. I just hated life. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't necessarily have to sell, and I was really excited to. And I got the excitement of getting it off of my plate. That kind of blinded me a little bit on some of the things that I should have done that aren't exactly fun.
Mm-hmm.
Doing your own diligence on a buyer is not fun because you want to feel like the situation is going to happen the way that you want it to. You also want to ensure that you're taking your time and getting the best deal for you based on and the most safe deal for you. So getting cash in escrow and ensuring that you're, potentially taking stock in the buyer's company to ensure that they don't feel like they just have a free license to
Do
screw
whatever.
you. Yeah, screw you because they're tied to you. So that sort of thing would be smart. Dealing with an investment bank at that dollar figure that we sold was not a realistic thing, but at certain dollar figures, it's definitely something that you want to look at going with a broker or an investment bank, just because you have more, full-time resources on making things bulletproof. And if you're just doing it yourself, getting cash up front is a better move.
Oh, and there's so many things. I mean, like, trying to run a company, sell a company, and then manage your own emotions. I mean, it's just it's a constant like war zone inside your head.
Yeah, it's difficult.
As you're, when you look at the sales that you've gone through, what things would you identify or would you do now that significantly would increase the value of business? You mentioned predictive revenue when you're talking about cyber superstores, but what are some other things that you realized maybe after the fact that you would have tweaked or done differently to increase the value of the company and the multiple or the transferability of it?
Yeah, great question. I would have taken pieces of the process and gone from a service business to a tech-enabled service business. And built some proprietary technology to systemize and automate a lot of our processes. That way, it would feel a lot more like stability over the course of time. We then take the product market fit that we had as a service business, and then pivot, mostly or completely to a software as a service offering, and lock people into lower dollar but still like B2B size monthly recurring payments, and make most things as self-service as possible. We had the plans to do that with that company, but it was a little bit more slow going. Since I was like the sole founder and one of the bigger movers and shakers in the company, a lot of the work was down to me. And at that stage, when you are that person, you don't have a business, you have a job.
Right.
So like it's difficult to sell your company if you have a job. So because you're not going to sell yourself. And maybe some people will exit and they'll put golden handcuffs on themselves for a couple of years and continue to run the company. But that's not really something that I had any designs to do at the time.
That was perfect. That was absolutely like how you phrased that, because I want to maybe peel back and get some examples from you and how, because I think there's so many people, Travis, that struggle with, they're in the service business or they became very intelligent and they've got a niche, but moving, I mean, attorneys and accountants and everybody online, anybody that's a thought leader, to move and switch from the service to tech enabled and then to software, that's very intriguing. I think a lot of people need to start looking at that. Explain maybe a couple examples or some things that you've seen and how to even explain, I guess, maybe elaborate is probably the best way to ask it.
Great question. I'll actually use a current example. So right now, I mean, I'm currently the head of growth at lottery.com. I came on as like the first executive level hire there and did not anticipate coming on as a full-time employee. I was actually running a consulting company called Viral Hero, which I still run today. I didn't there for a year. I kind of shut it down, but I've picked it up since. And basically that company is injecting kind of standard growth processes and viral product mechanics and contagion modeling into software companies, and basically helping them grow through recruiting their own users to grow their product for them. And that, I mean, sounds great, but it is, it's tricky unless you know what you're doing. And thankfully the last couple of companies have kind of showed me that roadmap to do so. And now what I'm doing with that company kind of as a side project, in contrast to us building lottery.com, is I'm resurrecting the brand to work with companies and create processes and software for like to kind of like map virality and the kind of intricate nuances company by company that can lead to that. So it's over the course of planning, and because let's be honest, most service firms are heavy spreadsheet users, and what people don't realize are spreadsheets are programs.
Right.
So if you can take what you do in your spreadsheets and make those user-friendly and obvious enough to allow other people to do what you do with them for no training, like with no training and making it stupid simple to get the results, or at least part of the results that you would derive for them, they're going to pay you money for that. So there are offerings out there that are more DIY, and some of them are good. But as soon as you identify kind of an area service-wise that people will pay you for, it's not the service necessarily that people are paying you for, it's the value that you're providing. They don't necessarily care that you're doing it manually. They care that it's being done. And if you can get the task done, it doesn't matter if it's automated or not, or systemized dramatically, enabled with technology or not, it's getting done and it's creating value for the consumer. And that's kind of, if you think about it through that lens, it's just a no-brainer.
I love everything you just said, because I think so many people that struggle with, okay, like you said, they've learned something, they're doing something, and they're running their numbers or scenarios on spreadsheets. And what happens is that's not sellable. You're not sellable. You've got a job, you're a consultant, or, you hire a couple of junior level associates, but there's no value or transferable value in there. So I think there's this big paralysis on how do you get out of that rat race. And so maybe I want to peel another layer back, because how would you, I think a lot of people, especially in the Twin Cities here, there's some very expensive coding companies like, they think that it's going to be $500,000 or something like that to go build something out like this, and all the pains and headaches around it. How do you start dipping your foot or your toe into this situation to be able to free yourself out of your own cage that you've built?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the first step is to educate yourself on just the first piece of the process. and to have conversations with folks who have done it before you, learn the pitfalls, learn exactly what they wasted the majority of their money on, and just take notes and start being a student. And the next thing, really, honestly, if there's one thing that you take away, is that you will never, I don't want to say never because people have done it, but 9 times out of 10, you will not start a successful company using only your idea. That's like,
Yep.
and the paradox there is most people start companies because they have a good idea or what they feel is a good idea. But when you start a company based on consumer need, and not because you just assume that consumers need it because it clicks with you, but that you go out and you have several conversations with the same cohort of people, they're describing their problem in the same way to you over and over again, you find a pattern, and they've demonstrated in various ways that they're actively searching to pay people to solve it. That's when you can really uncover the businesses that can grow really quickly. And there obviously are several exceptions to the rule, but that's exactly what they are. Is there exceptions? And you can't ever plan to be an exception. An example of this is one of our clients at Viral Hero, actually. One of the podcasts that I did years ago now, Dane Maxwell's foundation, he basically asked me to create a video or two on how to like extract ideas out of customers to start a software as a service company. And so I basically went through that process of, okay, find a cohort of customers that you can easily find their contact information online for free. It's readily available, and they want them to find you. Second, you just go sit down and have conversations with them. Don't lead the witness. Just ask them to describe some of what they're going through and what some of the challenges that they're having, and how much it's worth to them to solve, and just going through that process. And once you find patterns, and it's probably going to be 15, 20, 30 conversations, you're going to figure out how to solve it. A company basically saw that video and followed every one of those steps to the letter. They did not treat themselves like an exception, and they followed all the steps. Then they went to Viral Hero, they read the blog, and they started to do those things, and then reached out and basically said, hey, you want to work with us on this project? We've followed all the things that you're telling us to do, and here we are. They're in the cannabis industry, which I know nothing about, but they basically work with growers on this thing called traceability, which I still don't know that I understand fully, but they didn't exist in January of this year. Now they've got about a $650,000 a year recurring revenue stream. They've got no customer churn, and we're going to be closing around a capital for them soon just based on their growth. And it's just insane how quickly they're signing customers up because they followed the process.
And did they build a software platform then that helps solve that need then?
They did, yeah. But the way that they did it is they didn't build this whole suite of tools without showing customers what they were. They basically built the products with the customers.
You read the lean startup, the minimal viable product.
I mean, and they went even beyond that, and they basically said, all right, we're gonna start to solve this problem manually first for these companies. And then each piece we're going to start to productize. And we're going to make it more and more user-friendly. And they didn't decide, they basically actively decided to not do a million different things good enough. They picked one thing and they became the best at it. And that's the most difficult thing to do for any entrepreneur, because the one thing that kills every company without fail, and some of mine have been included in that, is shiny object syndrome.
Squirrel, right? So, well, I love this because even if you're not just a startup, but it's the way out. If you've got any kind of service business, you've already got customers that you can talk to, probably some very loyal customers, and understanding how to systematize and automate what you're doing for them is the way to increase the multiple or the potential exit options that you've got, because you've built something that everybody wants.
Yes.
So curious, because I know you were kind of talking about it earlier in the interview, and you're going down to this one thing because you've been all over the place, but now you're kind of zeroing in, and it sounds like you've got some passion in some very focused areas. When you said it kind of comes down to the starting with the end in mind. And you said that the great entrepreneurs not only start, but then they also finish.
Yeah.
So how have these different scenarios or exits changed your mindset on what that end looks like? And then how would you define a successful finish?
Oh, great question. It's a little bit of a paradox because I'm simultaneously the guy that does not care about money and also the guy that wants all of it. Because and not because like I want I don't have expensive tastes, and I don't really care about material things, but I often see money as opportunities to build cooler things faster. So the end in mind for me, honestly, is to build enough of a hands-off, recurring, stable revenue stream so that I can let this machine run by itself, go over here and do the exact same thing, and then let that machine run by itself, go over here and do the exact same thing. Then somehow collect all those things into one kind of vertically integrated process and sell the entire thing to do something even bigger. So I don't know if that process really ever ends for me, but I know that finishing at this point now looks like connecting the dots more effectively, fitting the pieces of the puzzle together more tightly, and sticking around even past those moments where you're just like, oh my God, this sucks so much. I need to figure out how to build automation and enjoyment back into the company. As a CEO, creating company culture and fulfillment is part of your job. It's not just being the person that like is the visionary and ideating on the product and talking to customers and optimizing and whatnot. It's actually creating a great place to work that's fun and fulfilling. So those were lessons that I think in the last 2 years I've really learned more than ever.
Yeah, I think I can relate to a lot of those different comments, and I'm just kind of curious. So, like, because I'm wired the same way, and I think most entrepreneurs, it's all about build, chase revenue, chase their industry, trying to be the best. I mean, because we are able to judge our success based on balance sheets and numbers and how we're doing. And I'm just kind of curious, in your head, whether you've articulated it or not. I mean, is there what's your definition of meaningful work and happiness? And how do you know when, if you've sold that, you've rolled those things up, you've sold it again, how can you judge, where do you find the fulfillment?
Oh, that's a great question. The fulfillment for me is the mission that you put forth for yourself. I mean, if you can really boil it down to it, and not everyone can answer this question in the same way for their entire lives. Some people can, but I'm not sure that I'm that guy. But if you can sit down and ask yourself why you were put on this earth, what purpose it was that you are here to serve, making money is not going to be your answer.
Right.
So being able to find something else, a problem that you feel like is important, that you want to solve, don't justify, because every one of us is smart enough to justify enough. I mean, a past company that I was running was creating viral marketing tools for blogs, right? And and I had some battles in my own mind with like fulfillment, and people around me would be like, "No, you're like arming people with tools to become more successful. It's great." I'm like, it feels like a justification. No, like it was a good idea for the reasons of validating some of my own ideas and some of my own theories in business and on the internet. But in terms of like purpose driven, it's not there. And a lot of the things that I've done in hindsight, I've sold because it just hasn't felt like that thing. It hasn't felt like it. And lately, in the last couple years, it has become something that I've known is I'm less and less able to compromise that type of thing than I used to be. For example, for a very brief period of time, I co-founded a hedge fund with a few folks and very quickly realized that I just was not going to enjoy the process of being in that business, even though it may pay a lot of money. So I very quickly resigned after a couple of weeks and just said, look, this was a mistake. I'm sorry. Guys are very smart. They're great. They're great guys and gals. But, in terms of purpose and mission, I think it's just something that you feel really connected to based on the things that you've experienced in your life, things that you've seen, the things that you've felt, the things that you see in the future as being, patterns that you want to create or don't want to continue very, very strongly, and that you feel will drive you through those moments where you feel like the walls are closing in, because they will come. No matter how much money you make, they will come, and you're gonna continue to experience them. Like the higher levels you play, the more you're going to experience the entrepreneurial roller coaster, and the more intense those swings will get. So if you don't have your purpose, if you don't have your mission, it will break you.
What problem do you think you were put on this earth to solve?
Well, I'm kind of between a couple right now. One, I'm really obsessed with the space elevator, which is basically a cable that extends from about 64,000 kilometers into outer space to an Earth node. And climbers basically travel up and down this cable that take payloads into space for like incredibly cheap and potentially human payloads as well. That is said to be one of the most profound gateways to human innovation, because it suddenly makes space travel economical and feasible for anybody. But it's also one of those like giant megastructures that is one of the most difficult things in the history of humanity to create. So that's one that I've been obsessed with for several years, that I've just read every single book on that exists.
That's really cool.
And then the other is in the healthcare space. It's laboratory testing is like personalized medicine is incredibly expensive because of the cost of ongoing laboratory testing. So our healthcare system is built on the fact that you only go start treating things when you show symptoms. And oftentimes that's very late in a process. Mm-hmm. And if you're starting to get laboratory testing as a preventative measure to pinpoint things when they first begin, you can make changes to your life well before you start manifesting symptoms. That might be a little bit more of a short-term purpose in contrast to the space elevator. But both of those are pretty near and dear to my heart.
I love it, because you have to have a big vision to make all the little steps and the bumps and bruises all worth it, right? And so as you look at how do you balance the daily tasks of lottery.com and your viral hero and all the different the stepping stones to get to the ultimate vision? How do you balance all those things?
It's tough. The balance, and honestly, the balance becomes easier when you can choose one thing. I don't know that I've been able to do that even today, to just choose one thing and focus only on one thing. And mostly just because of my brain, I feel like I'll burn out on one thing, and the best way for me to get rid of that is to think about something else. And my job is also my hobby, so I always have a few different projects. Balancing for me comes down to just the most regimented routine in the history of humanity. Like my morning routine is pretty epic, and I've got a checklist system that basically runs my life. That like it's. You would think that I have some sort of weird OCD, bipolar, I don't know what, something, if you saw it.
We should compare notes, man. I'm literally the same way.
Right on. But it worked for me.
Having some sort of normal rock in the middle of all the chaos, right?
Definitely. And just like something that allows you to outsource. Like I don't have to remember most things now. I can put them on the list, and I'll just remember to pay attention to those. And as long as I have list items that balance different other areas of my life, and I want to do those things, I'll find time. And a lot of times you can batch doing two things at once. Like I can definitely batch education and getting a workout in, by listening to some audiobooks or something along those lines. So there are ways to do a lot with a little, but there's still 24 hours in every day, and there are still limitations of the human mind.
So, if we look back at your different exits, and you're probably going to have more in the future as well, for entrepreneurs that have sold or the ones that are looking to, and what would be one piece of advice that we've talked about that you would highlight or one that you'd want to leave the listeners with, that is how you're dealing with the whole exit journey, the before and after, and how that impacts you personally?
First things first, get in contact with someone who sold the company before, and just ask them some questions. Do what you got to, buy them a cup of coffee, send them $50 or whatever for 10 minutes of their time, and just tell them where you're at, tell them what you're looking for, and ask them, if it were them, where would they look? What would they do? Even if they don't know, they're probably going to know a little bit more than you, and they're going to get you a little bit closer to a complete picture. Do that a couple times. You're going to be educated to a certain step in the process. Rinse and repeat. So I would do that to start with. Think carefully about, whether or not, depending on the size of your exit, you're going to want to go with professionals, whether a broker or an investment bank. And I think that that's a good idea, and it's worth the beefy commissions in a lot of cases, because they'll take it off your shoulders, and they will usually not take jobs that they don't know that they can deliver on. And they're going to give you a lot of protection that you wouldn't have anyway, because this is what they do every day, and they're pretty savvy at it. So,
and they'll tell you all of your weaknesses too, if you haven't already addressed them.
Definitely. And they're going to have a staff that will basically do most of the heavy lifting for you, and you'll be able to continue to do what you're good at. So
I think even before that too, going back, and I want to emphasize one of the things that you said, which is about systematizing and getting yourself out of the day-to-day and making predictable revenue, because a broker or an investment banker can't do that for you. That takes time ahead of time, and thinking about that,
Oh, definitely. 90% of companies that people sell don't make it in venture beat. You're not, like, when you're thinking of people who will potentially acquire you, you're basically never going to think of the people who will actually acquire you, because most acquisitions just come from people who like money and people who want to create a new revenue stream for themselves that are well capitalized currently. So, all of my exits have come from, companies or people that I've never heard of. Very few people will actually sell a company to Google or Facebook, but unfortunately, those are the ones that you hear about in the news. So that's what everyone thinks is the reality. It's not. And unfortunately, also, you're going to find people who, if you tell them you've had exits before, will assume that you're incredibly, incredibly rich, because the only ones that they've ever read about are people who have sold companies to Facebook for $30 billion. So they're going to assume that that's you. And it's up to you to be able to learn how to manage their expectations.
Interesting. Yeah, I think those are some amazing takeaways. Yeah, because people don't want another job. Buyers are normally financial, and they don't want to jump in and do your job. They want a machine that's kicking out cash. So just knowing that,
And talk to your employees. Make them understand what's going on. Basically say, look, this is what's happening. This is why. This is how your life will or won't change. Because if you suddenly have a revolt on your hands and all of your employees want to leave, that sale is not going to work out very well for you. Or if, on the other hand, that company wants to gut the company and insert their employees, and your employees are really happy there, that's also something that you're going to have to live with in your own mind. So if you can get those things balanced, and you can, kind of live with the outcome, then you're going to be fine.
Thinking about it ahead of time, you're exactly right too, because we sold to a strategic buyer, and the numbers work by gutting things, and that's not. Well, it was tough, man. Mentally, very, very, very tough.
It can be.
Travis, what is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm not really on social media a whole lot these days, but you can get in touch with me through one of my two different consulting firms. One is called Viral Hero. We do growth consulting with startups and growing brands. Travis at viralhero.com. The other one's called Bax, BAX, and we do fundraising consulting in the very same way. And that's just bax.co. So Travis at bax.co.
Travis, I had a blast talking to you, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.